Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Rishi Sunak's ill-advised attempt to jump on the bandwagon and claim that the local election results show that we're heading for hung parliament territory. In reality, of course, we're not. The question is, why would Sunak want to help promote this rumour? Now, you may think, well, it helps the Tories if they can persuade people it's true. But as I'll demonstrate in this video, it actually helps Labour, not the Conservatives. Sunak is once again doing Labour's work for them. And once again, Conservative MPs seem too witless to tell him to stop. So at the weekend, Sky News decided to push the idea for the second year in a row that the local election results point to a hung parliament. The professor who carried out this analysis for them is not, of course, a statistician. In fact, they've got no basic background in statistical analysis at all. Needless to say that real statistical analysis have all debunked the claims, with The Guardian producing an article from real polling experts explaining what's wrong with the methodology. However, the fact that the claim is nonsense doesn't make it pointless if you have an agenda to drive. Nonsense claims, if backed up by enough in the media, can still be believed. Exhibit A, Brexit. The reason why Sunak is making a mistake by pushing this narrative is not because it's false, but because he's making two assumptions that aren't working in his favour. First, he's assuming that voters are not keen on the idea of a Labour-led coalition. And second, that voters would rather try to give the Tories a majority than suffer said Labour coalition. Both of these assumptions are not quite true, as they were back in 2015 when the same scare tactics absolutely worked a treat. But More in Common have polled this, and guess what they found? Of all the realistic options, voters prefer a majority Labour government, okay? But the polling also showed they'd prefer a Labour coalition to a Conservative majority government. Now, there was a time when the Tories were able to use the fear factor of a Labour coalition in their favour. 2015 was the main year when it really helped them against Miliband's Labour, but they have used it since as well. It's no longer how people feel. So Sunak's assumptions are blown out of the water. But that's not the extent of the problems with Sunak's idea of pushing this nonsense. The main problem is that, so let's say you believe in this hung parliament theory. And let's say you don't want a coalition government. You'd rather a majority Conservative government than a coalition Labour government, right? Labour are ahead of the Tories in the polls. So if you have this voter, and there will be some voters like this, there will be some voters who go, well, we'd rather a stable government, so we'd rather a majority Conservative government than a Labour coalition, right? If those voters did want to vote in such a way as to avoid the coalition, they'd still vote Labour, because Labour are ahead in the polls. And they are therefore the party most likely to win a majority. So even if polling evidence didn't point to people preferring a Labour coalition over a majority Conservative government, it would still be pointless Sunak pushing this basic, because the tactic only works if the best way to get a single party government is to vote Conservative. That's not the case. So however you look at the situation, Sunak is not helping his party out by pushing this line. And anyone else pushing it is not helping the Tories out either. But it's not just that it isn't helping, it's actually hurting them. There are a few people who are aligned with Labour, like myself, who just get indignant at any misinformation. So we'll call it out. But Labour themselves don't really seem bothered with the narrative. Why? Because the greatest fear the Labour leadership have is complacency, being the victims of their own success. They know that many people who will vote Labour aren't really voting Labour. They're voting to get rid of the Tories. They don't want these voters thinking that the result is a foregone conclusion. Otherwise, they might not turn up to vote. Or if they do, they might vote for someone else instead, thinking that the result's in the bag anyway. Despite Labour's public hostility to tactical voting, they know it benefits them as much as any other anti-Tory party, arguably more so. In fact, Labour are trying very hard to push the narrative that the general election is not a foregone conclusion. They're telling voters this. They're telling their own MPs. They're certainly telling party members, because I get the emails. So Keir Starmer is absolutely wetting himself that Rishi Sunak is very kindly presenting this important Labour message to the public. It's presumably why there's been no great kickback against this claim from the Labour leadership. And this tells us something about the general incompetence of not just the Tories, but even the party advisers. Sunak decided to push this claim. It's not just that the claim emerged and some Tory shills jumped on it. Rishi Sunak decided to push this claim yesterday. He must have discussed it with advisers beforehand. Whenever he goes out in public, he will always discuss his main talking points with his advisers. That's what they're there for. Now, as I've already noted, it's clear from polling evidence that people would prefer a Labour coalition with anyone to a Tory government, but also that for those who don't want a coalition government, they'd still vote Labour to stop one happening because Labour are more likely to win a majority this time than the Conservatives. Genuine analysts know this too. So when Sunak was discussing this with his advisers ahead of pushing the line yesterday, one of two things must be the case. First, that Sunak's advisers are as clueless as he is. They're unaware of the polling evidence about coalitions and even lack the basic mental acuity to work out that voters who don't like coalitions will vote for the party ahead in the polls as being most likely to get a majority. That's Labour. And if Sunak's advisers are genuinely this thick, that they'd approve of him pushing this message, oh yes, Prime Minister, absolutely push this message, it's marvellous, then they're going to approve of him pushing really bad lines all the way to polling day, whenever that is. Or the second alternative is that Sunak's advisers are not all this thick, and they told him, they said, no, Prime Minister, this doesn't work in our favour. But that Sunak is ignoring them, thinking he knows better. Well, this will still result in much the same outcome. If Sunak is getting better advice than is apparent, but he's not heeding it, he will still continue to make missteps. Because this is a big misstep. Team Sunak really is utterly incompetent, not just in government, but in basic campaigning. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.